Sometimes the moment that breaks your heart is the same moment that quietly rebuilds your life, though you rarely understand it when it first happens. On a cold December evening in Manhattan, the city glittered like a field of scattered diamonds beneath the winter sky, and Naomi Carter believed she was walking into one of the happiest nights of her life. Snow had begun to fall in soft silver flakes, drifting past the towering glass windows of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, where the annual Whitmore Holdings Christmas Gala would soon begin. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers glowed with warm golden light, reflecting across polished marble floors and rows of towering evergreen trees decorated with delicate ornaments imported from Europe. Naomi stepped through the entrance earlier than anyone expected, her heels echoing gently in the quiet hallway as the final preparations for the evening were still underway. She had planned it that way. Tonight was meant to be a surprise. For 5 years she had stood beside Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire CEO whose name was known across boardrooms from New York to San Francisco, and tonight she wanted to remind him of something simple, something human beneath all the wealth and headlines. In her hands, she carried a small velvet box wrapped in deep red ribbon, a Christmas gift she had chosen weeks earlier after wandering through a quiet jewelry store on Madison Avenue. It wasn't extravagant by Whitmore standards, but it meant something. Inside was a vintage watch restored by hand, nearly identical to one Ethan had once mentioned his grandfather used to wear. Naomi remembered the way his voice had softened when he told that story, the rare moment when the world's most disciplined businessman looked like a boy remembering home. The hallway smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, and somewhere in the distance a string quartet rehearsed the opening notes of a familiar holiday melody. Naomi paused beside a tall window overlooking Fifth Avenue, where traffic moved slowly through the snowfall, headlights glowing through the drifting white like distant lanterns. At 32 years old, Naomi Carter carried herself with a calm elegance that drew attention without asking for it. Her deep brown skin shimmered under the soft lights, and the emerald green dress she wore had been tailored perfectly to her figure, flowing gracefully with every step she took. She wasn't simply Ethan Whitmore's wife. She had once been a rising financial strategist with a reputation for sharp instincts and steady leadership. But marriage had changed things. Not badly, not at first. For a long time their life together had felt like a partnership between two people building something powerful side by side. At least, that's what Naomi had believed. She glanced down at the velvet box in her hands and smiled quietly to herself. Ethan would probably still be upstairs in the executive lounge finishing a last-minute call with investors, because that was who he was, disciplined, relentless, always 10 steps ahead of the market. But tonight, just for a moment, she wanted to interrupt that world. She wanted to walk into the room, hand him the gift, and watch that rare warm smile appear again. Naomi moved further down the hallway toward the private wing reserved for Whitmore executives, her heels tapping lightly against the marble floor. Staff members hurried past carrying trays of champagne flutes and polished silver serving dishes, nodding politely as they recognized her. To them, she was Mrs. Whitmore, the composed and gracious wife who appeared beside Ethan at charity events and business galas with effortless confidence. None of them noticed the quiet excitement in her eyes as she approached the corridor that led to the executive lounge. The door at the end of the hallway stood slightly open, a thin beam of golden light stretching across the floor. Naomi slowed her steps, adjusting the ribbon on the small velvet box as she prepared to surprise her husband. For a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine his reaction, the way he would look up from whatever deal or document filled his attention and see her standing there unexpectedly. She could almost hear his voice saying her name the way he used to, with that quiet pride that made her believe she truly belonged beside him in this extraordinary world. Naomi took one final breath and reached for the door, unaware that within the next few seconds everything she believed about her life, her marriage, and her future was about to change forever. Naomi pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make a sound as the soft golden light from the executive lounge spilled across the hallway floor. The room beyond was elegant in the understated way that only immense wealth could create, with dark walnut paneling, floor to ceiling, windows overlooking the snowy skyline, and a long table set with untouched crystal glasses waiting for the evening's first toast. Ethan Whitmore stood near the window with his back partially turned, his tall figure unmistakable in the charcoal-tailored suit he always wore to the annual Christmas gala. Even from several feet away, Naomi could recognize the precise posture of a man accustomed to leading billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. For a moment her heart warmed with the familiar comfort of seeing him there, exactly where she expected him to be, exactly the way she had imagined during the cab ride through the snow. She lifted the velvet box slightly in her hand, preparing to speak his name and surprise him before the ballroom filled with guests. But then she noticed something unexpected. Ethan was not alone. Standing beside him was a woman Naomi had never seen before. She was tall and poised, with sleek blonde hair falling neatly over the shoulders of a cream-colored winter coat that looked expensive enough to belong in the same world as Ethan's boardroom. The two of them were standing closer than Naomi had anticipated, their voices low and serious in a conversation that clearly had not been meant for anyone else to hear. Naomi paused just inside the doorway, instinctively remaining quiet as the sound of their voices drifted across the room. At first she could not understand the words. The city outside hummed faintly beneath the falling snow, and the faint melody of the string quartet echoed up through the floor from the ballroom below. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice calm and controlled in the way Naomi had heard 1,000 times when he addressed investors or reporters. "The divorce will be finalized after Christmas." The words settled into the room with a stillness so sudden that Naomi felt the air around her grow heavier. The velvet box slipped slightly in her fingers, though she tightened her grip before it could fall. For several seconds, she simply stood there, not moving, not breathing, as if the world had quietly tilted beneath her feet without warning. The woman beside Ethan responded in a soft voice that Naomi could not fully hear, but the tone carried an unmistakable familiarity, the kind of closeness that belonged to private conversations rather than business discussions. Ethan nodded slowly, as if confirming a decision that had already been made long ago. Naomi felt the warmth drain from her chest, replaced by a calm so sharp it almost felt unreal. The room had not changed. The snow still drifted outside the windows. The golden lights still reflected gently across the polished floor. Yet something fundamental inside her had shifted in a single sentence. Naomi stepped forward then, the quiet sound of her heel against the marble floor finally drawing Ethan's attention. He turned quickly, surprise flashing across his face the moment he saw her standing in the doorway. For the first time that evening, Ethan Whitmore looked unprepared. Naomi met his gaze with steady eyes, her posture composed, the small velvet box still resting in her hand like a forgotten memory from a different evening. The woman beside him straightened slightly, clearly realizing that the conversation had just gained an unexpected witness. For several seconds none of them spoke. Naomi allowed the silence to stretch between them, not out of hesitation but out of clarity. She had heard enough. She had understood enough. The words Ethan had spoken could not be taken back, and they had not been meant for her ears. Finally Naomi tilted her head slightly, her voice calm and quiet when she spoke. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." The sentence was simple, almost gentle, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of something ending. Ethan opened his mouth as if to explain, but Naomi did not wait for the explanation. She placed the velvet box slowly on the edge of the walnut table beside the window, her fingers lingering for only a moment before she released it. The ribbon remained perfectly tied. The gift remained unopened. Without raising her voice, and without another word, Naomi Carter turned toward the hallway again, her emerald dress moving softly with each step as she walked away from the room, from the conversation she had never been meant to hear, and from the life she had believed would last forever. Naomi walked down the quiet hallway without looking back, her steps steady even though the world inside her chest had shifted in a way she had never experienced before. The marble floor reflected the soft gold lights above her, and each step echoed faintly through the corridor like a reminder that the moment she had just lived through was real. Behind her the executive lounge door remained open, and although she could not see Ethan anymore, she could feel the weight of his surprise lingering in the air like the final note of a song that had ended too soon. Naomi did not rush. She had never been the kind of woman who ran from difficult truths. Instead, she walked with the same composed grace that had carried her through years of business meetings, charity events, and public appearances beside one of the most powerful men in New York. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting the calm expression she had carefully maintained. For a moment, she studied her reflection as the doors closed and the elevator began its slow descent toward the ballroom level. The emerald green dress she had chosen earlier that evening still shimmered beneath the lights, elegant and composed, exactly as she had imagined when she prepared for the celebration. Only now the meaning of the evening had changed. Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying the quiet storm building beneath the surface of her thoughts. The words she had heard in the executive lounge repeated themselves in her mind with perfect clarity. The divorce will be finalized after Christmas. Ethan had spoken the sentence as if it were a business decision already signed and scheduled, another item on a calendar full of corporate negotiations and financial forecasts. What surprised Naomi the most was not the sentence itself, but the realization that she had not sensed the decision before tonight. For months, Ethan had been distant, working longer hours, answering questions with polite but brief responses, promising that the company was entering a demanding season. Naomi had accepted the explanation because she understood the pressures of leadership. She had once worked in finance herself before stepping away to support the public responsibilities that came with Ethan's growing empire. The elevator reached the ballroom level, and the doors opened to a different world entirely. Music floated through the grand hall as the string quartet began the opening chords of a familiar holiday classic. Staff members moved gracefully between round tables covered in white linen, adjusting place settings and lighting rows of tall candles that filled the air with a warm glow. Guests had begun to arrive now, elegant coats and evening gowns appearing through the main entrance as laughter and conversation slowly filled the enormous room. Naomi stepped into the ballroom unnoticed at first, just another figure moving through the preparations of a prestigious event. For a brief moment, she stood beside one of the towering Christmas trees that decorated the hall, its branches heavy with silver ornaments and tiny lights that shimmered like stars. 5 years earlier, she and Ethan had stood beneath that same tree welcoming donors to the Whitmore Holiday Foundation Gala, smiling for photographs, and thanking investors whose support funded children's hospitals and education programs across the country. Naomi remembered the pride she had felt that night, believing she and Ethan were building something meaningful together. Now the memory felt distant, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes, and Naomi accepted one politely even though she did not drink from it. Instead, she watched the room slowly come alive around her. Couples greeted one another with warm embraces. Business partners exchanged confident handshakes. The orchestra music rose gently toward the high ceiling as the chandeliers glowed brighter with every passing minute. From the balcony above, she could see the entrance to the executive wing, where she had stood only moments earlier. Somewhere behind that hallway door, Ethan Whitmore was likely preparing to walk down the staircase and greet his guests as the proud host of the evening. Naomi wondered briefly whether he would follow her, whether he would attempt an explanation before the night unfolded in front of hundreds of witnesses. The thought passed through her mind calmly, without anger, without fear. For the first time since she had heard his words, she understood something important. The moment in the executive lounge had not destroyed her life. It had revealed it. Naomi Carter straightened her shoulders slightly and placed the untouched glass of champagne on a nearby table. Around her, the Christmas gala continued to grow brighter, louder, and more celebratory by the second. Yet within that sparkling ballroom, a quiet transformation had already begun, invisible to every guest except the woman standing calmly beneath the silver lights of the Christmas tree. The music in the ballroom continued to rise with the warm rhythm of the orchestra, and the laughter of arriving guests began to fill the space like the steady hum of a city coming alive at night. Naomi Carter remained standing near the towering Christmas tree, its silver ornaments reflecting the glow of the chandeliers above, creating small circles of light that shimmered across the polished floor. From the outside, nothing about her appeared unusual. She stood with quiet elegance, her shoulders relaxed, her expression calm, exactly the way she had stood at dozens of charity events and business celebrations over the past 5 years. Yet something inside her had shifted so completely that even the air felt different in her lungs. Naomi watched the room carefully as more guests arrived through the main entrance. Familiar faces from the world of finance and philanthropy moved through the crowd with confident smiles. Board members from Whitmore Holdings shook hands near the stage where Ethan would soon give his annual holiday speech. Investors from California and Chicago greeted one another with friendly conversation, while waiters circulated with trays of sparkling drinks and small plates of delicate hors d'oeuvres. The entire evening had been designed to celebrate success, generosity, and prestige. Naomi had once helped plan these events herself, reviewing guest lists and donation commitments while Ethan finalized the foundation's yearly announcements. She knew exactly how the evening would unfold. In less than 15 minutes, Ethan Whitmore would descend the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. The orchestra would pause, and hundreds of guests would turn their attention toward the host whose company had become one of the most influential investment firms in the country. Naomi lifted her gaze toward that staircase now. Its curved banister gleamed under soft lights, the polished steps waiting like the opening scene of a performance that had been rehearsed countless times. She wondered briefly whether Ethan already knew she was downstairs. Perhaps he was still standing in the executive lounge processing the unexpected moment they had shared only minutes earlier. The memory returned with perfect clarity, his voice calm, the sentence simple and final. The divorce will be finalized after Christmas. Naomi felt the words again, but the pain that might have followed such a discovery had already transformed into something quieter and far more powerful. Clarity. She had spent years believing that the strength of a marriage came from loyalty and patience, from standing beside someone even when ambition pulled their attention toward distant horizons. Naomi had believed that partnership meant adapting, supporting, waiting for the seasons of work to pass so that two people could find their way back to one another again. Tonight she understood. Something else entirely. Sometimes silence is not loyalty. Sometimes silence is simply distance waiting to be acknowledged. A group of guests approached the Christmas tree where she stood, their conversation animated as they admired the decorations imported from Europe. Naomi stepped slightly aside to give them space, her calm presence blending effortlessly into the elegance of the evening. One of the donors recognized her and smiled politely. "Mrs. Whitmore, you look wonderful tonight." Naomi returned the greeting with the same graceful warmth she had always offered. "Thank you. I hope you enjoy the evening." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it reminded her how carefully the world of wealth preserved appearances. To everyone in this room, she was still Naomi Whitmore, the composed partner of the man whose company sponsored the celebration. None of them knew that the foundation beneath that title had already begun to shift. The orchestra paused briefly before beginning another melody, the gentle sound of violins floating through the air as a signal that the host would soon appear. Several guests turned their attention toward the staircase, anticipating Ethan's entrance. Naomi followed their gaze, and then she saw him. Ethan Whitmore appeared at the top of the staircase exactly as expected, tall and confident in his tailored suit, the powerful presence that had made investors trust him with billions of dollars in decisions. From a distance, he looked exactly the same as he always had during these events. Composed, controlled, untouchable. Yet as his eyes moved across the ballroom, they stopped suddenly when they found Naomi standing beneath the silver lights of the Christmas tree. For a brief second, the confident rhythm of the evening hesitated. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly, the smallest fracture in the polished composure he had perfected over years of public appearances. Naomi met his gaze calmly, neither challenging nor retreating. The orchestra continued to play. Guests continued to talk. No one else noticed the silent moment unfolding across the ballroom between the billionaire host and the woman who now understood exactly where she stood in his carefully organized world. The host of the evening making his entrance to welcome friends, partners, and benefactors who had traveled from across the United States to attend the Whitmore Foundation Christmas Gala. Yet Ethan's attention had already fixed itself on a single point in the room long before he reached the bottom of the stairs. Naomi Carter stood beneath the glow of the silver Christmas lights exactly where he had seen her moments earlier, composed and unmoving among the crowd. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the careful rhythm of an event slipping slightly beyond his control. The orchestra lowered its volume as he reached the final step, and several guests approached him immediately with warm greetings and congratulatory handshakes. Ethan responded with practiced ease, smiling politely as he thanked them for attending and asked about their travel through the winter weather. To anyone watching, he appeared exactly the same as always, the confident leader whose calm presence had earned the trust of investors and board members alike. Yet beneath that polished exterior, his thoughts moved quickly. He had not expected Naomi to arrive early. He had not expected her to hear the conversation upstairs. Most of all, he had not expected the quiet steadiness with which she had walked away from the executive lounge without demanding an explanation. Across the ballroom, Naomi watched the scene unfold with the same calm clarity she had discovered earlier beside the Christmas tree. The room had grown fuller now, the golden chandeliers reflecting against rows of tables where guests settled into their seats, while waiters moved gracefully through the crowd with trays of wine and champagne. Laughter rose through the hall in warm waves, and the orchestra continued its elegant background music as photographers positioned themselves near the stage to capture the evening's formal announcements. Naomi noticed that several guests had begun glancing between her and Ethan as he greeted people near the center of the ballroom. Their curiosity was subtle but unmistakable. Over the years, Naomi had become a familiar presence at these events, standing beside Ethan during speeches and foundation announcements with the calm confidence of someone who understood both business and philanthropy. Tonight she stood alone beneath the Christmas lights, and the absence of that usual pairing created a quiet question that moved through the room like a breeze through silk curtains. Ethan eventually excused himself from a conversation with two board members and began walking slowly toward Naomi. The movement was subtle enough that few guests noticed, but those closest to the couple felt the shift in the atmosphere as he crossed the polished floor. Naomi remained where she was, neither stepping forward nor turning away. The distance between them gradually closed until they stood only a few feet apart beneath the silver branches of the Christmas tree. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music continued softly behind them, and the gentle glow of the lights reflected in Naomi's dark eyes as she looked calmly at the man she had once believed knew her better than anyone else in the world. Ethan's voice was low when he finally spoke, careful not to draw the attention of nearby guests. "Naomi, I did not realize you had arrived." His words sounded polite, almost formal, as though he were greeting an important donor rather than the woman who had shared his home for 5 years. Naomi studied his expression quietly before responding. "I arrived earlier than expected." Ethan hesitated, aware that the simplicity of her sentence carried far more meaning than the words themselves. For the first time since stepping onto the staircase, he seemed uncertain about what to say next. Naomi glanced briefly toward the stage where the microphone stood ready for his speech. "The evening is waiting for you, Ethan," she said calmly. "Your guests expect a welcome." Her voice held no accusation, no anger, only the composed certainty of someone who had already reached a decision within herself. Ethan looked at her carefully, as though searching for some sign of emotion he could recognize, but Naomi's calm remained unbroken beneath the Christmas lights. Around them, the celebration continued to grow brighter and louder, unaware that beneath the elegant glow of the holiday gala, a marriage had already reached its quiet turning point. The orchestra paused for a moment as the master of ceremonies stepped toward the microphone near the stage, signaling that the formal part of the evening was about to begin. Around the ballroom, guests slowly turned their attention toward the front of the room, while the quiet conversations faded into a respectful murmur. Ethan Whitmore remained standing beneath the silver lights of the Christmas tree with Naomi only a few feet away, yet the space between them felt wider than the entire ballroom. Naomi could see the familiar calculation returning to his expression, the same composed focus he used during negotiations and corporate announcements. Ethan had built an empire by solving problems quickly, and she knew he was already trying to determine how to control the situation unfolding before him. Naomi watched the process calmly, almost with curiosity. For years, she had admired that intelligence, the sharp mind that could read a room in seconds and guide conversations exactly where they needed to go. But tonight she understood something else. Some moments could not be managed like business deals. Some truths simply existed whether anyone wanted them to or not. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice controlled but quieter than before. "Naomi, we should discuss this somewhere private." Words. For the first time since their conversation began, the confidence he carried in public settings seemed to hesitate. Naomi could almost see the realization forming in his mind that this was not an argument he could redirect with logic or persuasion. Understanding, and with each passing minute the realization became clearer. She had been standing inside a chapter of her life that was quietly closing, even though the celebration around her continued as if nothing had changed. Naomi glanced across the ballroom, where Ethan now stood surrounded by several investors and foundation donors who congratulated him on the speech. He listened with polite attention, nodding and shaking hands with the composed confidence that had made him respected in every boardroom he entered. Yet Naomi noticed something different in the way his gaze occasionally moved through the room, as though searching for something that had suddenly become uncertain. Each time his eyes drifted toward the Christmas tree, he found the space where she had been standing only seconds before. Naomi had already stepped away. She moved slowly along the edge of the ballroom, passing the tall windows where snow continued to fall over the bright streets of Manhattan. The city outside looked peaceful beneath the winter sky, traffic moving steadily along Fifth Avenue while the lights of nearby buildings shimmered through the gentle snowfall. Naomi paused near the glass and watched the quiet scene beyond the hotel walls. 5 years earlier she had arrived in this city with a sense of excitement and possibility that seemed almost endless. She and Ethan had built their life together here step by step, first as partners navigating the demanding world of finance, and later as a married couple whose public presence became part of the Whitmore Foundation's identity. Naomi remembered the nights they spent discussing ideas for the charity programs that eventually helped thousands of families across the country. She remembered the pride she felt when Ethan's company expanded into international markets, and the quiet evenings when they celebrated small victories with dinner in their penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. Those memories were real. They had not been illusions. Yet standing beside the window, now Naomi understood that memories do not always guarantee a future. Sometimes they simply mark the distance between who two people once were and who they have quietly become. A soft voice beside her interrupted the thought. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you enjoying the evening?" Naomi turned slightly to see Daniel Brooks, one of the Whitmore Foundation's longtime advisors, standing nearby with a warm and respectful smile. Daniel had worked with the organization since its earliest days and had always treated